Hello, everyone. I'm Jennifer Matris.
I'm Anthony Esser.
And this is another episode of Offsides. We are super excited to have some special guests here with us on this episode, Bob Jensen and Daniel Principe. We will be introducing them more formally in a second, but I do want to make sure that everyone knows that this is coming with adult content. So make sure that you understand that this is not suitable for children. So make sure that they are out of the room if you're listening to this or watching this. So thank you so much for graciously accepting this invitation to this very important and necessary conversation about helping our youth becoming more aware of what's going on. And we just want to give them extra tools and education with this important dialogue to make this world a better place. So first I will introduce Robert Jensen. Hi, Bob. Thanks for being here. You're coming to us from New Mexico, where you live. Robert is an emeritus professor from the School of Journalism at the University of Texas at Austin. He's a phenomenal writer, author of several books, two of my favorite, The End of Patriarchy and Getting Off. Check them out. They're, again, my personal favorites of books that I have read. He is also a host of a podcast from the prairie, where he, rightfully so, challenges us as human beings to rethink the way that we are living with this high consumer energy and technology world. So thank you, Robert, for all that you do, and again, for being here. Daniel Principe is coming from all the way from Australia. We thank you for getting up early to be with us. Daniel works with an amazing nonprofit organization, Collective Shout, where he uses his special gifts to be an advocate of the youth, an educator. Most importantly, you really focus on a passion of pouring into the boys, of resisting the way that boys are raised in this world, particularly resisting pornography, the sexualized images of girls, also talking to the girls on how they're worth more than what this world is presenting to them. So thank you, Daniel, for all that you do with the youth, and we just can't wait to talk with you and what you're doing in Australia on this call. Anthony here, I do want to spend a moment expressing that Anthony is my associate, my business partner with Competitive Edge Skating here in Detroit, Michigan. We work with youth hockey players, and Anthony is one of the most courageous people I know, with using his story of living and being brought up in this culture of misogyny, white male supremacy, believing in these hateful attitudes and behaviors. And he's been so courageous speaking out about his own story, and has dedicated his life to want to help our youth, particularly boys, to resist, making sure that they don't go down the same path that he did. And then also hopes that we can save some more girls from the pain that is being caused with this male domination. So thank you all again for being here. You're three amazing men to me. I do want to start with explaining that I personally was brought up in a patriarchal home. I didn't know it back then as patriarchy, but I just knew that I didn't like knowing that somebody thought that they were better than someone else. And so fast forward years later, me working with hockey players, I started talking about the men's violence against women. But learning from Robert Jensen here, you have poetically expressed that no one has gone unharmed with patriarchy, that no one has gone untouched with male domination. And so I actually want to start out with giving you three males a space to briefly express your stories of how male domination and patriarchy has affected your lives in just, a few sentences. So Robert, I'm going to start with you, but if you could actually start with giving our audience a definition of patriarchy and how it's come to be, and then lead into your story briefly.
Sure. Well, thank you. Patriarchy is a term that generally is used to mean simply some form of institutionalized male dominance, a system in which it's assumed men are rightfully on top. So in that sense, virtually every society on the planet today is patriarchal in very different ways. The way that Saudi Arabia is patriarchal is different from the United States, but both are based on that. And you see that reflected in who controls wealth and power, who has status. Now, no society is static. And of course, feminism, which is where I learned about all of this, I didn't figure this out on my own. I was lucky to be exposed to some wonderful feminist women and feminist writers. And it's like any other system of domination and subordination. It's challenged. It responds to those challenge. Um, the the feminism that I learned first, that emerged in the 1970s and 80s in the United States, won some major victories. Then there was a backlash, a pushback. So patriarchy is simply the name for that particular aspect of a domination subordination dynamic based on gender. And we all live immersed in it. Jennifer, said you grew up in a patriarchal home, and I said yes, and the sun rises in the east. I mean, these are just realities for almost everybody on the planet. So that's how I understand the concept. And I can talk a bit about my own experience. I'm now an adult of kind of average size, but I grew up very short, skinny, and effeminate. And so I always thought that I took the brunt of patriarchy because of who I was, because I wasn't strong enough, I wasn't athletic enough, that I was a target because of me. And what I learned through feminism is that virtually every man, even the men I thought were, the heroes, the high school quarterback, the men I thought had it made. What I learned is that every man at some point wonders if they are man enough, because what patriarchy does is not only give men power over women, often to the kind of results we can talk more about, the horrible endemic nature of men's violence against women, the routine sexual exploitation of women, all those things. I'm not equating what men go through in patriarchy to what women go through, but men suffer from all of those same things in some sense: violence, sexual exploitation, just not at the same level and the same rate. But what I learned is that even the men I thought had it made were struggling. That when patriarchy sets up not only men to dominate women, but men to be in constant competition with each other, that in that sense, everybody loses at some level.
Thank you, Bob. Are you good with that explanation so far? Like, just to share with that?
Yeah,
okay.
I'm interested to hear from Daniel.
Yeah, Daniel, I'm going to turn it over to you, please.
Sure. I grew up with a single mom, and I would say that I didn't have the best male role models for those that were in my life at different periods growing up as a teenager. And similar to Bob, but similar to a lot of guys, and what I've learned through Bob and other writing is that like no one is ever man enough. So for me, my experience was being a soft, sensitive kid, and I'm still a soft, sensitive adult. And when that's your experience at an all boys school, in an Australian culture, you're called every homosexual slur under the sun from the age of about 11 to 19. And it didn't matter that I was a straight A student, didn't matter that I represented the school in football and athletics, and that's Australian football, just to clarify. The real stuff. It didn't matter. It doesn't matter, because you can never achieve that kind of archetypal masculine, and no one can. But I didn't have the language for it then, but looking back, that's where my journey began, because it's like there was something that deeply troubled, obviously, because when it impacts you personally, it troubles you, about how we socialize guys. Like, what is going on here that we seem to reward the most calloused, harshest versions of how men can be in the world, and we police and shame any other expressions that don't conform towards that. And so that was my experience, and now I just see that being replicated, in schools all across Australia. And so that was kind of what kick-started me, and I'm so grateful to have heard other voices and had other opportunities in my 20s to rethink how I could be in the world.
Thank you, Daniel. Anthony?
So kind of a similar thing to Daniel of, just growing up as a very sensitive, caring, empathetic kid. And then was just brought up in a home that was based around athletics, and got into that kind of culture where basically, I coming from just that sensitive child, I was shamed a lot for crying. I mean, there was one specific moment in middle school that, is traumatic to me to this very day, with my own father shaming me for crying. And it just, it basically made me feel just confused. I thought I was like, getting away from who I actually was. I was a scrawny kid, but, eventually worked and got away from that and tried to be extremely big, and just shut off every little like emotion in my heart inside of me. And it just led me down a path where, I got consumed with pornography, which shut off my heart even more and just made me extremely angry and caused me to hurt a bunch of people in the process, unfortunately, mainly women. And I think I'm still feeling the effects of it today as I continue to go through. I mean, healing from this has been a rough journey for sure. Because it's very frustrating because I know that this could have all been prevented, especially with meeting, a radical feminist like Jennifer, who basically enlightened my world and awoken my world to that I was acting extremely inhumane.
Jennifer, you gave us permission to digress. May I start immediately doing that? Listening to the two of you, I started thinking about athletics, which, the use of the human body to play is such a wonderful thing. It's a part of every human culture. And I was thinking about patriarchy distorts athletics. So when I was growing up in the 1960s and 70s, this is before Title IX, girls had virtually no way to use their body in sport. They were just cut out of it. And for me as a boy, it really wasn't fun. It was set up as competitive. And if I couldn't match a level of performance, then I wasn't allowed to just have fun doing what I was able to do. And so patriarchy distorts and deforms so much of human experience that itself is not a problem. There's nothing wrong with athletics. But I grew up in an incredibly corrosive world where athletics was dangerous or people were excluded from it. And that's patriarchy in a nutshell. It excludes some people and distorts the experience of others. So
thank you for saying that. That is something that I'm struggling with too, with now seeing this and how we can possibly make hockey not so violent.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that. Thank you to all three of you for being vulnerable with your own stories. So I want to ask, Gail Dine says, women don't want to rock the boat when it comes to challenging like their boyfriend, their husband, their fathers, men in their lives when it comes to these things. So that I see that they're just capitulating to these things. And I understand there's a fear component to it. But I actually want to start with Daniel. You do such a phenomenal job in your work with talking to girls and how they can possibly see and hopefully see that they're worth more in this world rather than just capitulating to what patriarchy says that they are. Can you share a little bit more about your work with the girls in Australia and like what kind of exercises you do? I know I still want to continue to learn from you because I know that Anthony and I are still struggling with getting to girls and women with this message to open up more.
Yeah, well, first of all, I have to acknowledge my colleague Melinda Tankard-Reist, who's invited me into this very sacred space to be able to work with young people. As I say to parents and community leaders all the time, it's a real privilege to be able to work with young people, to be able to have some pretty confronting conversations, to challenge some horrible ideas and welcome them to break free of very limited, narrow ways that they can express and represent themselves in the world is such a privilege. And we do this through a very media critical kind of analysis of all the messages that they're receiving and asking very simple questions like, is this helping you to see yourself as fully human? Is this helping you to be valued and respected for things outside of being thin, hot, and sexy? And when you start to kind of do this by doing a 2-minute exploration of pop culture and walking down the mall or the shopping center and show the different depictions of men and women, they quickly realize that we've just become so desensitized to how we frame the male body and the female body. And it's so obvious and it's undeniable. So we take them through a crash course to see these different depictions and to ask the question, like, how are we going to expect women to see themselves as fully human and boys to see women and girls as fully human if everything in their culture that is saturating them depicts women as merely objects? And that's where we take it, and then we finish the session if we're invited to do so and there's enough time. Is I ask them, like, what are the pressures that they're all facing as young people? And it's a humanizing exercise. It's not a point scoring thing. It's to say, like, I want them to enter into the experiences of the other and go, well, why is it hard? I ask the boys, tell me, is it hard to be a young woman in this culture? And they all say yes. I check in. And then I asked them, okay, boys, tell me why. Like, what is going on that makes it so hard for young women in this culture? And then we unpack that and we workshop this and we ask the question, like, what are these pressures? And invariably, everything that we would talk about comes up about got to be thin, got to be hot, got to be sexy, can't have a voice, got to conform, got to get likes on Instagram. And then we flip it and then we ask the question, like, what should young women be valued and celebrated for that's not about their appearance? And this is just one of the most joy-giving exercises I get to do. And it's even more exquisite when you do it with the year 5s and 6s who haven't quite yet been darkened by mainstream popular culture. And they have this innocence about them. And they think it's an absolute disgrace that women aren't seen as fully human, that they're not treated as equal, that they're depicted as objects. And it's one of the most precious things I get to do in life. But to see this for the young women, you definitely get to see them, realizing, hang on a second, like, this is so limited how I can show up in the world. And we've just all got so used to it. And the terrible thing is that, to borrow from Gail Dines, which is like, they either are invisible or they're effable, and it's like, if they're the two, options for young women, like, well, what is that? And so we're just trying to tear down that paradigm and invite them to see that there's so much more and that they have a voice, that there's things that they shouldn't accept that we've all become a little bit too polite about.
Mm.
And if I may add something, what Daniel just said reminded me that it's about opening up a new way of thinking for girls, and then with boys in their presence. And I went through this long after I was a boy. Unfortunately, I was slow to pick it up. Is that I'm contributing by the way I'm thinking about girls and women. I'm contributing to the pressure they feel. And that's what reading feminist literature did for me. I realized, oh, I'm not above all of this. I'm part of this. And the way I am seeing women is actually a burden for women. And that's, and I know when Daniel is in mixed groups, he's not only helping the girls, he's helping the boys see their contribution to it. And that is a powerful moment for a guy when you finally realize what you're contributing to. Powerful in a very scary way.
But why are so many, and we're going to get to the question that is at the heart of this is about empathy, but why are so many refusing to want to, like, deconstruct that? That's at least my experience, is that men are struggling to want to like, Daniel, are you seeing it at a certain age where it's just like there's a point of no return?
I note that probably between the age of about like 11 and then by the time they're about 13, for young men, this callousness sets in 2 years. And it's heartbreaking, and it hit me really heavily about a month ago, because I had the opportunity for 3 or 4 days in a row to work with the year 5 and 6 boys, so 10, 11-year-old boys here in Australia. And you saw this sweetness and this innocence, and they're obviously prepubescent generally at that age. And to see then to engage with the year 7, 8, 9 boys, so we're between 12 and 15 there, and to see the difference was so hard for me, the contrast to see how quickly these ideas had taken root as they enter into puberty. They shift from, being interested in their parents' approval to their peers' approval. And it just seems to be this downward spiral of a race to the bottom. And that sounds hard to hear. And I know in these times we need messages of hope. And I have heaps of those to give, and wonderful stories. But when you see that there is this race to the bottom of callousness, of indifference, of cold-heartedness, of just sheer apathy towards so many things, I find that deeply troubling. It's one of the things I find most distasteful about Australian culture. And it seems to just be on steroids when it comes to how young men, show any care or kindness in the world, which is crushed out of them. And I confront the boys. I talk about how they police and shame one another and they limit one another, because I have on pieces of paper and in private messages and in tear-filled eyes coming up to me after my sessions, boys telling me I try to be decent, I try to be kind, I try to be empathetic, and the other boys hammer me for that. Here in Australia, I don't know if it's in the US, we call boys simps. We call them gay, we call them simps. There's all these slurs to just police their behavior to get them to conform. So if a boy is nice to a girl, he's a simp. He just can't be a boy who's being nice to a girl. We got to label it, we got to police it, we got to shame it. And so I just go in there and try to pretty much just tear that apart and just say how unhelpful that is, how it's creating this either options for this toxicity towards women or this degradation towards women and this policing of male behavior. And it's not working. And they see it and they know it. And then I challenge them to show courage to disrupt that, to stop being bystanders and to call that out. Because it's just continuing to lead them down paths where I know themselves, they don't want to be like that. They just feel that they have to perform this ugly version of masculinity. And it is a performance, because the girls tell me one-on-one, the boys aren't like this. The moment another boy enters the room, the performance starts. So I say to them, I know this isn't actually you. Maybe it is for a very few portion who are sociopathic, but I know for the most part, it is performed callousness.
Can I jump in and say one thing?
Yeah, keep it going.
This reminded me of an incident in my own life. I was, as I said, short, skinny, effeminate. I was a target, but I often was able to talk my way out of tough situations. There were a few other boys in this grade in junior high who were much more vulnerable. And I remember one day in the shower room after gym class, the entire class, like a mob, turned on this one boy, and you could see him being destroyed psychologically as they taunted him and chanted. And my only reaction was, I didn't participate. I was just so glad I wasn't him. Right? It's this ranking that if I would have identified with him and come to his aid, I would have then been just targeted. And I still feel a certain amount of fear and shame about that I didn't have the courage. Of course, I was an 11-year-old kid. I was terrified of life. I mean, there are a lot of reasons I couldn't do it. But it's not only the way boys treat girls, it's also the ways boys rank and then treat each other. And there are boys then who essentially are treated like girls with that same kind of cruelty, and it's destroying so many people. I mean, I'm sorry, it got me really emotional, because it just catapulted me right back to my own childhood, and this is 50 years ago, and it's still with me like it was yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
So what do we do? Like, that's where I'm kind of like, you're all talking about a question that I had for like our youth, because I feel the locker room is one of the most unhealthy, unstable, toxic environments, male locker rooms. And I don't know what to do anymore. Even these parents are coming to me, these coaches are doing nothing. The coaches are MIA, and these poor boys feel like they want to do something, but they're scared to death. Mm-hmm. Like, what do we do? Is there anything that you could maybe give us some words of encouragement of what to do with this?
Yeah. Well, no surprises. We just need whole of community buy-in. it's the young people, it's the girls. So it's like we embolden the girls to have a voice, to raise their standards, to set boundaries, to say no. And this is where we're at. We live in this Me Too society, right? And we think, oh, things have changed. The most common thing we hear from young women is they do not feel like they can say no in this culture. You know, like female empowerment in like this, you know, hypersexualized world isn't a thing when you're talking to 13, 14, 15-year-old girls. They feel like they have no choice but to go along, which isn't choice. So we need to embolden the girls to speak up. We need to identify male leadership across all the different subcultures of a school. So yesterday I was speaking with the nerdy boys. I spoke to a couple of the athletic boys. I had one of these guys who you could tell was in the cool group. He loitered around afterwards. And I said, God, dude, what was going on with those boys at the back that were rowdy? And he said, yeah, man, they're always like that. He's like, that's why I chose. And I love this. This is a story of hope. He said, that's why I chose not to sit next to them today. He goes, because I wanted to lean into this message. Because he's like, I try and call it out, but it's hard because it's just me. I cannot tell you how proud I was of this boy. The fact that he had shown that initiative before he even walked in the room, he knew that he needed to get away from a particular pack because he wanted to lean into this. And for me, that's where I go, like, how do we resource him? So I made sure I said, reach out to me. I will send you resources. But those are the kinds of boys where in every subculture within a community, it's like, how do we equip them, embolden them, give them more leadership capacity to actually start to change culture? And for the adults in the room to reinforce that. And it's not going to happen overnight. And I'm not saying that he needs to pick every single little scrap and dogfight to call it out on, because that is exhausting as an individual, but to actually choose when to say, no, that's not okay. That's not okay. And to set new standards for them. But like that for me is where it has to happen. And those messages have to be reinforced from the school leadership or the sporting club leadership or whoever. Like we all have to agree and set some standards. And the crazy thing is, right, is you actually hear this from the elite sporting teams. Like I've seen a shift, and I'm someone who loves my sport, that they actually talk about, you know, things like playing with joy. So the Golden State Warriors, that's one of their core values is, yes, they're a competitive team who's won 4 championships in the last 8 years, but they've actually said one of our core values is joy, which I think is an extraordinary thing. A lot of them talk about humility and like this idea of servant leadership. And I think to myself, what would it look like if a sporting club actually said, like, what does it look like? I've heard this with the New Zealand All Blacks, where they would actually clean up their locker rooms and make it spotless. Like the players, it wasn't something that was like, that was left to the cleaners and the people that pick up my dirty socks. The captain of the team led by saying, no, we're not going to leave this as a mess. We are going to demonstrate service even behind the scenes. And that's where I think to myself, yeah, what does that look like to actually say, no, this is what we're going to be defined by, and to actually have buy-in and to set those standards. And I remember, you know, there's been sporting coaches, I've watched their press conferences in America. I've seen it here where they've just set standards where they're like, no, we're stamping that out. So one of the most successful basketball teams here in Perth, I knew their CEO, and he set standards culturally. He said there will be no swearing in the locker room. Like he kind of, and again, I don't know to what extent that, you know, and when that did or didn't apply, but he was kind of saying to them, this is more than just basketball. This is about the type of men I want you to be. And they went on to be one of the most successful franchises under this guy's watch. So like, that's a lot of different ideas, but to say that, yeah, there are things that we can actually do that invite buy-in.
I like all those, but I would like those professional athletes to start speaking out about more of the harms of men's violence and pornography. Like that's where
totally.
But I'm just, you know, I'm not patient. Bob, were you going to say something? I know Anthony wants to talk too.
Yeah, before we leave that, I was actually going to ask Anthony, since I'm the old man of the group and I haven't been in a locker room in recent memory. Are young men, Anthony, receptive to this? Do they want to talk to you about this? What's your experience?
I mean, so in my experience, they just come to me. I mean, specifically, I remember we had a high school kid in our program a year or two ago who came to me and he was so overwhelmed by like that fear that you were talking about. Again, like you don't want to be that outcast. Mm-hmm. You want to be a part of the group. And that's actually what I was going to add to Daniel's thing too is I think we also have to educate these boys that they have a choice as well, because in my experience, I allowed the fear to consume me because I didn't know any other alternative route. I just thought this is what we're supposed to be doing as boys. So I didn't even know what the other route was until, again, like I've given you so much credit of, a radical feminist came along and said, this is the other route. And then I'll even just be vulnerable and admit there's been times in the past couple of years when I've been less than ideal, or I should have spoken up in certain situations. And just knowing that I had that choice and then going home that night and just that feeling of like, man, I should have, spoken up. That's also what progressed change too, to speak up and utilize that choice of, sticking up for the common good of like, this isn't okay,
I think that's probably the reason why we aren't seeing change faster, because Anthony's so uncommon with going home and at least sitting and contemplating, where a lot of, I think, what we're seeing is so much consumption of technology that they numb and have no one to talk to. Like, the parents aren't home, especially with our sport. Like, they're so privileged that the parents aren't around and they're just on their video games and, social media. And so they're not even sitting with themselves like Anthony at least would go home and think about, what could I have done differently?
Absolutely. I think that a lot, like, where are those opportunities for young men to reflect on, like, who do you want to be? That's what I ask them. I say, like, who do you want to be? I'm not here to like morally pick on every little tiny thing, like, because I think if you see women as fully human, you don't need a long list of do's and don'ts. Like, you see someone as fully human, it becomes pretty obvious how you're going to treat them. So I asked them, like, have you guys thought about this? Have you thought about the type of guys you want to be? And I asked them, like, do you want the women and girls in your life to see that you were safe and respectful? Is that how they experience you? If we ask them, would they say Dan is safe and respectful or not? And I said, like, that has got to be a cause for reflection in your lives. And yeah, I think I'm so grateful that the schools invite me in for these reflection moments, but it needs to continue, and without breaking into a huge, digression on rites of passages and, male role models and opportunities for these boys, but they're saturated in noise and unhealthy messages 24/7. There's hardly too many moments to kind of break into their paradigm and actually say, hey, there's other things to consider. There's other ways of being. Like, is this working out for you? So one of the things I asked the boys here in Australia, and again, forgive my language, I asked them when we talk about mental health and male suicide, is I say, boys, do you guys in your classes and in your sporting fields just say to each other, like, toughen up, don't be a pussy, don't be a girl, don't be soft, like, have a can of cement? And I said, does that go on? And they all say yes. And I said, how's that working out for you guys? Is that helping you all with your mental health? And I just say it that bluntly because I want to get through to them and say, like, you guys just do this continuously without even thinking.
I like that. I know we're running out of time already. I could talk to you all for hours. So can you just briefly state then, how can we get from being sociopaths to empathy? I mean, I know this may be repetitive, but it's just so close to my heart. Like, when I hear you all talking about the mental health and what do you want to be seen as, it keeps going through my mind and heart of my experiences as a female. It's like, men just don't seem to care. Men just don't seem to care. They just want, like, so what's the difference? I want power, but then you lose your soul and empathy. What's this whole domination power aspect that's so appealing, yet it's stealing your souls? I actually would like to start with Anthony, because I feel like he's been brought up in so much hate and has seen it stripped away from him. How do we get back to screw the power and get back to love and connection and empathy?
Yeah. So this reminds me of something that I actually wanted to say, Daniel, when you said, though, you see that switch in those boys, what was it, 12 to 15? A thought that popped in my head is that's when boys are really consumed in pornography. I mean, in my own experience, I started watching pornography at the age of 12, and it just completely desensitized me within years, like just a short amount of time. And it separated me from myself. So how am I supposed to connect and put myself in someone else's shoes? And I think this is a really tough question, but I think what I've noticed in my journey through this healing is listening to, you know, someone like Jennifer, who is a female, because when I would have a problem with women, who would I seek out? I would seek out white males. So how I'm getting falsified information, right? This is why all male groups, they don't work. Like, we need to have, you know, male and female interactions where females are able to express, like, this is how this makes me feel. And I mean, at the end of the day, if men really want to get back to empathy, I mean, I believe you have to get off of pornography. I mean, it just strips you from, like, when you're watching those violent images, there's no way in heck you can ever have empathy. So that's the first step. And then I think just, you know, again, that male-female dynamic of men listening to how this is making females feel is at least a step for sure.
So can I go to you, Bob?
Yeah, I was thinking, again, the age difference is striking here. I'm about to turn 64. So I grew up in the pre-internet world. And the pornography was not as available and not as overtly violent, but still had a very destructive role in not only my life, but the lives of my contemporaries. It's not just about how violent it is, although that is a increasing dynamic that is troubling. It's turning the act of intimacy into nothing but pleasure seeking, usually through an objectified female body presented on a screen or in a magazine, if you go back to my generation. And I think that that can't be emphasized enough. The pressure boys are under that, you know, I never felt, and what I felt was bad enough. My only contribution to how this changes is to remember that one decent human being can change the course of your life, which is what happened to me. One older man became a mentor, eventually a very good friend, and he was vulnerable in front of me. He was honest with me, not only in being supportive, but in being critical when I said something that was inappropriate. And that one experience was all it took to bump me onto a slightly different path. Now, you know, my life didn't change because of one person, but having one person you can be honest with, one person who models a different way of being, is incredibly powerful. And that's always important to remember. I think every time we show up in public, you know, with friends in private, we can do that.
And I'm just going to add one more thing too, because I think this also goes back to women capitulating to this. And I also want to give hope to our female audience as well. Is just, you know, Jennifer has been such a great example of a female who has, you know, had the courage to call out my actions, and it's helped my life tremendously. So that's the hope that I want to give females as well, is that if you do, you know, speak up and stand up about this stuff, I mean, you're helping boys out, you're helping men out.
So I have many other questions, but I will end with this. I think it's a great segue what Anthony just said. A lot of people hear radical feminism and want to run the other way and have this poor outlook on it. But Robert, you've always said, instead of seeing it as a threat, it's a gift to men. Yeah. And like Bell Hooks and others have said that it's going to be the change that this world needs. Can you all three wrap up this amazing conversation with maybe, Robert, I don't know if you want to explain maybe the definition of radical feminism, because I know there's different feminisms. Yeah. And then why you all have been positively affected by radical feminism, or why you see it as a gift, please.
Yeah. First of all, I don't in every situation talk about radical feminism. I do use the term to honor the women who did such pioneering work, who were so brave. And that is how they describe themselves. And that is how I came into this, recognizing that the heart of patriarchy is men's attempt to control women's sexuality and reproductive power. You can, fine-tune definitions, but for me, the entry was the radical feminist critique of pornography, right? Recognizing that it's not just sex, it's not just harmless fun, it is the eroticizing or sexualizing of that male domination and female subordination. And I think that's one of the key things that makes radical feminism different. It's willingness to critique things that are essentially now part of the culture, like pornography. How we approach people is always situational. And I know Daniel is very good at knowing how to talk about the ideas, sometimes leaving the label behind. It's not a purity test where you have to be radical feminist and every time you stand up, you have to, espouse a certain dogma. It's about how you move through the world to connect to people. And I know Daniel, Anthony, Jen, you all do that very well. So.
Well, thank you. I could do better, but thanks. Anthony or Daniel, why it's a gift or?
Daniel, I would like to know about when you show up in a classroom where you're not going to lead with radical feminism as an analytical tool. How do you explain it to kids?
Yeah, well, I'll first start by echoing, Bob's words. I didn't know that when I was introduced to these ideas that they were radical feminist ideas. I just was like, this was a very truthful and grounded observation of reality that I think was demonstrative everywhere you looked, everywhere you peeked. You're like, this is at play here. So it helped me make sense of my world, both at an individual level and at a structural level. And I went, yeah, this has got a lot of credence. Like I need to lean in more. I need to do more readings. So I think for me, I was at a position where I was ready to hear this, because I think unless you've decided to completely cut yourself off and conform to the game of domination, you're probably unsettled with how things are. So you're looking for a reason to make sense of why are things the way they are, when you've yearned for something better, when you're like, I truly don't believe this is how men should be in the world, and I truly don't think should be women's experiences of men. So that was why it resonated with me on both a structural and a personal level. In terms of how I engage, I never, ever, ever, ever use the words radical feminism, toxic masculinity. I just don't, because they are such loaded words that unfortunately are hijacked by ideologues in the culture wars, and they're weaponized to win political points or to get favor within groups, rather than to actually see heart transformation. Because I don't care how ideologically pure you are. Like, I want to see your heart transformed. I want to see you be able to engage with empathy. And I'm not going to put any of my I don't want anything to be a stumbling block and a barrier for you to hear that. I'm not saying that I would never use those labels, but I have to pick and choose. Like right now in this space with a group of young boys who already, like, no joke, I had a boy walk in yesterday and he looked at me, no joke, and said, well, what's this SHIT going to be about? And I just smile, and it makes me go, oh my gosh, you better buckle up, young man. But, so I already recognize that for some pockets that's there. So I've got a bigger goal in mind. I don't need to be ideologically pure. I'm not trying to impress any, academics listening along. I want these boys to come with me on a journey to see how women are fully human, and to see all the things in their world that limit them from doing that. And so that's my approach. So what we're doing is that it's just not packaged with a big flashing neon sign. So yeah, I quite enjoy that. I like the challenge of it, and it's incredible. And one of the things that I just like, the feedback I got yesterday, this young man messaged me late last night and he said, I just want to thank you so much. I realized I'd stopped seeing women as human because of pornography. And he said, I hate what this has done to me.
Yeah.
And so that's what gives me hope. Because I said to him, obviously I said, the fact that you feel so conflicted in yourself is a beautiful thing. It means you've got a pulse. It means you've got a conscience. It means you want better, and sometimes, and we don't have time for this, but for our next conversation, what troubles me deeply is men just reject any feelings of kind of that sense of, oh, I haven't done good in this world. I've not lived with integrity. And they want to reject it rather than sitting in that space where there is hope for transformation. And I see that in these boys. And I just wanted to share that.
And if I can piggyback really quickly, there is no progress without discomfort. I grew up in Fargo, North Dakota in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. I was trained to be a misogynist, a racist. I was trained to be what the culture told me to be. And it was not fun to confront that in myself, but that is the only way through it. So, you mentioned the noise in the culture, how easy it is to divert yourself from that. One of the things we have to do is remind people, Anthony, you said you've fallen down by your own standards. We all have. I don't know a single person who doesn't sometimes fail to live up to their own moral standards. And we have to be able to talk about it and talk about how painful it is, because that's the only way forward.
Are you okay with just finishing with them too?
Yeah, that's fine.
Oh my gosh, I'm just gonna have tears of joy because you three are just so absolutely remarkable. Thank you for giving us your time, your wisdom, your experiences. We hope that we can do this again for our audience, and just have a great rest of your day. I love you all so much. Thank you for giving our audience an example as males. That's all I can really say. Is just I love you all very much. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jen.
And Daniel, I promise I'll send you a message where I explain what offsides in is.
Sounds good.
Given your limited Australian background, you need to deepen your understanding.
Pretty slow down here. No, it was just so lovely to see you all. Honestly, I've never been so busy with schools, and I'll be honest with you, I go in harder now than I ever have. I'm talking and when they give me an excuse. So the other day I was in regional Queensland. So I don't know what that is for you. Think redneck on steroids, outback Australia. And I introduced myself to this group of boys, and they shook my hand and they introduced themselves. And instead of giving me their name, they gave the name of male porn performers.
Oh my God.
And I just, there's a sick part of Dan, there's a lot of them, but I loved that. I was like, oh yeah, we are on today. And I was like, and I said to them, and I just looked at them and I said, boys, you're not going to be laughing in 45 minutes. Yeah. And I gave the hardest talks on the horrors of the porn industry that I've ever given. And these boys were just, their shoulders hunched, they're gathering themselves. And it's not because I'm going out of my way to condemn these boys. I'm actually trying to find a pulse. I'm actually trying to see if there's any shred of decency in there that you are going to see this and go, no, that's not okay. And all I want to say with that is I've gone in harder, and the feedback from these young men is extraordinary. I had about 20-something year 10 boys flock me after my talk yesterday and stick around through their recess, didn't want to leave because they saw something that they wanted in this.
Yeah.
Well, bring that to the U.S.
Yeah, can you bring that over here?
And I just want Anthony and Jennifer, it's been, I don't know, a year or two we've been communicating, and I just wanted to say the work you're doing is really exciting. I don't know very many people around the country working with kids in sport like you are, and combining the conditioning and the training with this kind of perspective. So I'm glad we were able to be part of this, but I want to reflect back some gratitude to you for doing it under conditions that are not always easy. So hang in there. Want you to keep going.
Well, we will be in touch. Thank you for all of the work that you have all been doing. It's been a blessing. It's been a blessing. It's very helpful and encouraging.
Right. All right.
All right. We will see you next time.
Take care. It was great talking.
Bye.
Talk soon.
Yes.
Bye-bye.